Hello and welcome to, I guess, another edition of Art Tells a Story, Let It Tell Yours. My name is Tyler Cann. I'm the Pizzuti family curator of contemporary art and head of exhibitions at the Columbus Museum of Art. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Bobby T. Luck, who's holding a sign there for you. um, Bobby is a visual artist and education activist based in Columbus, Ohio, who works in film, multimedia, collage, and installation. And after relocating to Columbus from Philadelphia, he jump-started the Free School for Humans initiative, co-founded the awesome Mint Collective, and teaches collage and film theory workshops across the country. He recently served on the board of admissions for Acre Residency, completed the film video studio residency at the Wexner Center for the Arts. He currently has work displayed in the Columbus Museum of Art as part of our Art After Stonewall 1969 to 1989 exhibition. And I'm hoping we'll talk a bit about that. And is currently shooting some video collage series on psychological association, memory loss, decay, and creation. So welcome, Bobby, and thank you so much
Hello.
for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
How are you?
Actually really good. I'm having a really good day.
I'm delighted to hear it. Um, you know, I I would really like to get into some of those themes that I just talked about in terms of your, video collage series that you were working on. But I thought I would kind of like start with some rather simple questions in kind of
Okay.
about you and like what brought you to sort of becoming an artist and how you started to think of yourself as like, oh, I'm an artist.
Well, it's actually really funny. It took me a long time to consider myself an artist, like a lot longer than it took me to consider making art. I started I started like writing short stories and making collages probably when I was around 8. Um, I grew up like my dad was a quilter, so I was always helping him like cut out patterns and stuff. And then eventually I was like, I want to cut my own stuff, but 8-year-olds have paper, they don't have cloth. So I don't know, it was just like kind of like a back and forth between like working with my dad. And then as I got older, I was like, oh, well, art's not going to make me any money. I'm not doing that for a living. So I was writing for a long time. And then I moved here to Columbus, and I have a few friends who wanted to like open up just like a studio space for artists to share. And then it totally blew out of proportion into what Mint was, which is super fun. And I think that like working alongside all these artists made me realize that like my constant practice in art to like help me get through the day to day was definitely like not just like some sort of hobby, and it was something that I really need to do more often.
Yeah, and collage in particular. I think it's really like fascinating that relationship between quilting and collage. Um, what brought you to collage in particular?
I lived in a really sheltered part of the United States when I was first growing up. Like, not only sheltered like from the other parts of the United States, but sheltered from humans in general. I lived in the mountains, and there was like no one for like miles around, and so a lot of like what I learned was like about the world was specifically from media. So it was from like magazines, because like magazine subscriptions were really huge in the 90s, and then also like uh, media and television and movies. Just all of that stuff was like really important to me, and I was constantly ingesting out of like curiosity's sake. And I think that eventually I was just like, I want to be making these things for myself. I want to be creating media that represents like my experience as well as the experience of these other people that they're trying to show to me. And I think that was just like my way of working through my emotions about myself and the outside world and how I pertain to it.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, there was something I read that struck me. A kind of quote of yours was that everything is collage.
Yeah, I
By any chance
fully
find
believe
that?
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the reason why I say that is because, like, as humans, we walk around on a daily basis and we're always intaking information and visuals and sounds and media. And a lot of it is not contextualized and a lot of it's already contextualized for us. So, like, it's really about the process of contextualization, like being alive. You see a tree and you understand what it's made for, or you see a bed and you understand what it's made for, and then you use these as cues to communicate with other people. And that in a form is like really similar to collage. I use collage to communicate my ideas to other people by using the things I see and I hear. And I think that people just have to do that like on a daily day basis to be able to communicate with other people.
Hmm. I mean, I kind of think you could make the argument that like consciousness itself is collage. Like the
Oh yeah,
world
for
out
sure.
there is, it's not just revealing itself as a kind of in a kind of like holistic reality. It's what appears to be something like that is really our brain knitting together sensations, memories, feelings. And it seems to me that like the sort of texture of reality itself is kind of a sort of collage made by our brain.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think that like I fell even more into collage after I had um I had gotten brain damage, and through that it made me think a lot more about the way that I weave things together, and
Mm,
it helped me with my practice in a lot of ways to consider consciousness as a form of collage, like pulling things from like the inherent nothingness that is everything that's around us. It's like not actually anything until we perceive it. So I think that collage is really similar in that way. Like if you take apart different parts of a magazine separately, they don't really make any sense once you decontextualize them. But then when you put them together, it's like something completely different, like
mm,
a curation of your circumstances.
right. And I mean, I imagine for those with kind of who've experienced head trauma, the seams between those elements of reality are all the more visible. Kind of
Oh
like
yeah.
um, like two elements of collage overlaid on top of one another, and then you really sort of start to see the kind of breakages of where different elements kind of fall, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely always try to convey that in my video work because a lot of my video work is me trying to piece together and collage back my memories from the ones that I lost, be them like real memories or ones that my mind fabricated. They have to be real for me. So like when I'm trying to portray what it feels like to be like knitting together these memories, I think like the idea of like overlays and stuff like that really like blurs the line of like reality and perception in a way that is actually really comforting to me to know that it happens all the time with everybody and it's not just me with my broken brain.
Yeah. Well, everybody's brain is broken to one degree or another, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Actually, speaking of memory, I forgot to say that I believe you have a trivia question for our viewers.
Oh yeah, I do have a trivia question. Okay. Wait, do you know what they win if they get the trivia question right?
I believe it's a $25 gift certificate to Locks. Is it?
Yes, that sounds right. Okay. So the trivia question is what I mean 1977, Japanese horror comedy released a manga, a novelization of the script, a radio drama, and their soundtrack before they released their film.
So soak that in, everyone. 1977 Japanese horror comedy. All right, I'm very curious. I mean, that's a good one. That's a hard one to look up.
It is hard to look up, but if you know,
Yeah,
you know, you know.
yeah, exactly. But I mean, sort of back to where we were. A collage as a process, I think is kind of an interesting thing. Like I I remember hearing tell of the studio of Jess in San Francisco was absolutely filled to the brim with kind of files of little bits and pieces, of figures that have been cut out, or all of the kind of elements that go in, that went into his work. Um, how do you work? Like, do you have a kind of archive?
I definitely have like archival is always so important to me. So of course you have to have like a lot of material at all times to be collaging. Um, at the level that any collage artist does, because it's not just like, because when you're a collage artist, it's everywhere, it's all over the place, it takes over your whole life. I have probably like 600 magazines or something, but I do really like enjoy keeping my magazines like pretty intact and whole for the most part, and which is hard and ironic to do as a collage artist in general,
Mhm.
because eventually you're going to have to cut them, which I do. But I think because of that, I try to keep my like loose leaf archives to be like backup material to add on to things in case some sort of color theme that I'm thinking of isn't meshing. So what I usually do to start out a collage is I'll take 5 magazines, no real theme. I'll just pick them on random, and then I'll go through them, and also like just being very conscious of my mood and stuff and like how I'm feeling, and just pull out a first image, and from there it's like building blocks where you keep flipping and you find another thing and you bring that one out, and then you keep flipping and you find another thing, and then as you're doing this you're like kind of piecing together a story, or like a description or a person, or it doesn't really, like, I don't ever have an idea in mind until it's over and I'm like, okay, this is why I did this. And I
Mhm.
think it's really helpful for me to stay present in the moment, to not plan too much ahead when I'm collaging, and then also I end up liking what happens at the end more.
In a way, it's kind of like it's trusting a process, and that is going to be sort of generative and creative. I don't imagine that any collage artist could sort of begin with a vision of the whole thing
Oh
um,
yeah.
in mind. You would have to kind of like start with an image or a piece.
Yeah, the thing about healthy contextualization is you have to like be just as willing to get rid of stuff as you are to gather stuff.
Mm,
Because like nothing's ever really quite as it seems. So then I think that something would go really well together just because the themes are right, but it doesn't really go with what's trying to be said.
right, right. And your collage works also entail language often. Is that right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Um, well, like I said before, I started out with writing, and I think when I'm gathering mediums, because like I also make music and stuff to go along with my films. So I think when I'm
Mm,
gathering mediums to like put my focus into, it's really a lot about like more ways to, like more tools to uh, center around language in general. So writing is a tool to communicate with people, and then music is a tool to communicate with people. and so is visual. So the more tools that you use for communication, the clearer your message becomes. And I think that writing is always like one of the first things that you need to be able to push an idea forward, because it's like one of the first ways that we actually documented and archived our communication to each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, the work, collaborative work, Nocturne, which is well, it was both you and Emma Levesque Schaefer and Prince Shakur Twinkle Panda were all kind of like commissioned really by the museum to create a piece that is very much, I think, about the queer community and its histories in Columbus in a way, but began with a question of well, in a way, it's kind of like an oral history project. But actually, let me ask you to tell us a bit more about Nocturne and the
Yeah, for
question that
sure.
sort of drives it.
So what we had done was taken a lot of like people in the queer community that were mentors to us or important to us, and we just like got in like a kind of like comfortable setting and situation, one that would help conversation arise. And we asked the question, what was a moment in your life that you felt like the first moment that you felt like you were a part of something larger? And
I think it's a beautiful question.
it is a really good question because it really gets down to the core of like who you think of yourself, who you think of, like when you think of yourself, how you contextualize yourself, and then also the things that you value in life in general. In just like one question, you like learn so much about someone and what their aspirations are and what their expectations are of themselves and their communities. And we sat them all down and asked them this question, and then ended up with like 20 hours worth of audio of people like describing basically their story and like who they are and what they stand for, which is all like stuff that a lot of queer people don't really have the room to talk about. So it was really beautiful to be able to like take all of these stories and all of these like lessons and like giggles and good times and put them, and sometimes sad times too, and like put them in this like archival form that makes it digestible, uh, and makes it sound like a real timestamp for the moment that the people were talking. It feels like they're like in the room with you when you listen to it, and it's very conversational, and they're all in conversation with each other, because really queer culture is a conversation with your ancestors and with the people who you're fighting for and your friends that are around you right now that you're fighting for, and your family. And I think that's really important, uh, to share our stories and to like have that archival moment so that people can look back and see what our ideas were and what worked and what didn't. Because I like we don't have like a lot of that stuff from our people, just because of like access to being a loud person isn't really there for a lot of people. Like you can't, like you don't have the voice uh given to you to be able to, so you have to like kind of take it. And I like those moments when everybody just like has the space to sit down and say what they have to say. And I think that there needs to be a lot more moments where people sit down with like the intention of having a conversation about queerness in general, because a lot of times we get frowned upon for like, or for like looking too much inward. And it seems like in this moment, it was like a nice little celebration of like the inward and outwardness of us like theorizing about our bodies and our personhoods.
Well, I guess I speak for the museum in saying that we couldn't be more pleased to have supported like those voices and that, well, certainly the community, around the whole project. And it makes me think actually a little bit like as you're describing it now, it's sort of like we're very much part of something larger right now.
Yeah.
With this pandemic, and it's one of the interesting features of it is that of course, there are those. I mean, it's changed everybody's life, kind of
Yeah.
around the entire world, practically, and makes us think very much about what community is, and how interconnected we are, but also about the kind of vulnerabilities that have been already existing and are exacerbated by this change. But this idea of kind of like realizing that one is part of something larger, especially when faced with a certain amount of kind of alienation, societal, or kind of self-alienation. I'm wondering how many people, later on will look back at this moment, and in answer to a question like that, and be like, actually, it was March 2020 when everything kind of went to hell, that all of a sudden I felt like
Yeah, for
I
sure.
was actually part of something larger. Um, but um, I think. Well, I had another last. Oh, and for our viewers, we are, the Stonewall exhibition, which opened on March 5th, is something obviously that we had to close just 9 days later. Um, but we are extending that to the 4th of October. We're in the midst of doing that. So I'm really hoping that once the museum does reopen safely and securely, that you'll be able to come and see that exhibition, which has been a long time in the works, and the sort of audio overlay of the Nocturne piece, I think, really brings something quite special to it. So thank you again. Um, I had a kind of like a last question, because
Okay.
I think we're on 25 minutes here.
We're going fast.
But yeah, I know it goes so fast. I feel like we could continue talking for quite some time.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
um, but so many people are doing these kind of creative challenges, recreating an image from a painting, and the museums all over the place are kind of putting out these creative challenges for people to do in what I suppose is their newfound spare time. Um, and I was just curious if you had something that you might propose people do to kind of get out of their routine, or think a bit more creatively.
I think something that we've been doing in our little nook and cranny over here is like a lot more collage journaling. And I think that even if you don't really have a lot to talk about that you did that day, we all have had like a lot more time to think. And it's really good to like contextualize what you've been thinking about that day to understand why your mood was the way that it was. And so what I've been doing is like using that moment of like sitting with yourself and figuring out how you feel, and then going through photographs, and then using the collage that's made afterwards to like and pulling from it to understand like why I was making this collage in the first place. So, for example, I could make a collage and then think like, oh, well, why was I drawn to this mother lion? And that day, I could have been thinking about like uh, the act of giving care and love in general more than I was thinking about other things. And so like when you keep track of your day and a way of like specifically thinking about your emotions and your thoughts, it takes away from that urgency of like action that we all have to be like doing something and making something or creating something. You have like a moment to just sit and be like, what did I think about today and how did I feel? And you could do it at the beginning of your day about the previous day. You could do it at the end as a way to decompress. And I think that's been like really helpful for me to kind of just like keep myself grounded and sane in these moments of isolation.
Mm. I think that's, collage is in its way a very sort of reflective process of putting one thing, next to another and seeing what happens and how it reflects on your feelings is a really excellent idea. And putting an image next to any words. Go ahead, go on.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think that also like if you like write the same where you collage, where it's just like that stream of consciousness of like what you were thinking and what you were feeling, and you get it out and you just close it. It's like really cathartic.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, goodness knows that we could use more catharsis at the moment.
Very true.
Well, and hopefully at the end of it, and it's a difficult period, I think, for so many people, but I am hopeful still that we will see the other side of this and feel like we kind of came through something hard and are better for it.
Yeah, I've been so far pretty impressed with people. There's a lot of really beautiful things happening right now to go along with the bad.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, absolutely. And we shouldn't lose sight of that. And, I guess, hopefully this is one of those things. And I should thank the Reese Brothers for supporting this whole program, as well as Nicolette Cinematographics. And thank all of our viewers really for tuning into this discussion. Bobby, it's been really fantastic talking to you, and I hope to actually see you in person sometime soon.
Concept. Yeah, that sounds good. We'll have to get coffee.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.